Getting ready to mount the ISIS. Got all my brackets I need for the race logic, traction control, and the ISIS modules. One there, two over there, and then the race logic here, and then this one, which will go in the back. This is the master cell. This is the one where all the inputs, anything that uses a switch, will have a wire coming in through here, and then it'll send a signal out to the power cell, and you'll run a wire from that, like to your light or your horn, something like that. Vintage air is integrated into that. Remember, I relocated the control module for the servos, and the heater control and all that, and this ISIS module, because that's going to run through the touchscreen, which is why I wanted this ISIS to begin with, to be able to run that off a touchscreen. And all these brackets I put in here with nut certs, so I'll be able to unbolt those if I ever need to. And this is kind of a confusing part of the build for me. The wiring part, I think I've mentioned that before. So I'm just going to wing it, follow the directions, and the first thing it says mount the modules, where you want them, so that's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to kind of follow the directions and go bit by bit on it until it starts making some sense. It should start coming along, I would imagine. So I'll go ahead and get the modules flipped upside down and mounted on here, and then hit the next spot on the directions. There are the modules bolted up in there. I got the wires plugged in and getting it sorted out. Got the power cell. That's the in motion, I think they call it. It runs motors, solenoids, anything that will reverse polarity, like your windows, stuff like that. And then here's the master cell with the wires hanging down off of that. This one here will go to the touch screen. These are all your inputs. It's all runs off of ground. And plugging this cable here will connect the master cell to the power cells, and then from that power cell to the back. And I'll end up cutting that cable, routing it where I want it, and splicing it back together again. And I'll eventually use all this type of wrap. So I'll take this stuff off, cut and splice the wires, and when everything's done I'll wrap it up with that other stuff. So that cable connects those. There's going to be the same type of cable connecting this unit to that one. And I'll cut and splice that and make a real shorty, to connect those two. There it is right there. And you got power supply for the motor controller, and then 2 banks of outputs. And then over here you have 2 banks of outputs, you know, whether you use them all or not. And then it wants 2 different supplies for power. And then the back one will get the same thing. And I put that in there. So for now I think I'll run the power cables in there, get the CAN cables cut and spliced and ran where I want it. And then it will be time to start thinking about the inputs and outputs. Getting those routed. At some point in time I gotta stop and integrate the traction control and start wiring that at the same time, because that'll have to plug into the harness, the engine harness, which I don't have mounted yet. I don't have the ECU mounted yet. So I'll need to plug into the injector wires at that point. And then run wires for the speed sensors on each wheel. Got the body sitting on there. And mainly so I could kind of figure out where I wanted the rear power cell. But there's a few things I gotta work out with the body. And you know, as far as the electrical, if I'm gonna put any fans anywhere, you know, the location so I can run the wires, and the rear power cell, and I need to figure out where my intake is going to run, so I figured I have the body on for that. So I do have the rear power cell mounted up over here. And I got the wires running underneath here up close, and then it drops down drops its way down, and it's going to run down into here. And I'll do the same thing with the CAN cable. I already got the front part. The power ran for it. But this is all the power so far, which is coming from the power cells. And then also that's wires for the back, so minus the starter, that's pretty much the group of power wires that's going to run for the car. I cut a piece of hose. I got that routed in between some weird stuff just to make sure those power cables are protected a little bit better. And what else do I got going? Got the CAN cables ran. You know, going from the main cell to the power cells, and then back to the rear power cell. And what else do I got going on here? That's pretty much it. I'm just getting the basics basics done, getting them mounted, putting the power to them, getting the CAN cables hooked up, and then the main part of it's done. Kind of neat to see the body on there. Yep, gonna be a pretty crazy car, man. So I'm gonna finish routing the wires for the back. And then start looking at some of the other things if I want to put some fans in this engine bay somewhere, somehow, and where my intake is going to go. So we'll go for that. I got a lot done. Got the mega fuses set up where I want. These wires obviously aren't permanent. Got the CAN cables all wired, power cells with the everything wired up. Now, as far as the wire loom for the harness on the motor, I was kind of in question about where some of the wires went and what they did with that custom harness, so I kind of bypassed some of it. Ran my own wire for the alternator, and I got that going in out front, hooked up to the battery. I got my main wire for the starter ran all the way through, and I got that through some hose, keep it from chafing on something. Now at the starter, I jumped a wire from the solenoid. I gotta find a different connector down there to keep that off the header, and then wrap it with some heat shield. But I've got a jumper going from the main power wire to the solenoid, and because up front I have a solenoid hooked up here, so that wire's dead basically unless I'm cranking the motor. It's kind of a safety thing I like to do. So rather than running your solenoid wire back to the starter, you run it to this one here. And then when that gets power, it jumps across back there in the starter. So I've got all the ISIS hooked up. You can see the blue heartbeat in the ISIS. I don't know if you can see the blue heartbeat. I have nothing hooked up to ISIS yet except power and the CAN cables. The harness, motor engine harness, is 100% hooked up. I got it set up to where the motor will run without the ISIS, and just down to a bare bones system. And I got everything set up to run off of a key, which is right here. And So I'll tie into the ISIS off here and be able to run the ignition off the touchscreen, which is here. And I've got, I mean, that's working now. Like I said, nothing is hooked up to it. There we go. And if you were to start the car, go into ignition, turn the power on, and then hold the starter, and then turn the ignition off, back to main menu. I'll have to set up these different icons. There's Windows, driver, down. So that's kind of cool. And I'll put that on, have that on a switch. So you turn that on and off. So I'll have the ignition be able to run through the ISIS, you know, 90% of the time, and then in case of failure with the touch screen or with the system, I can turn the car on and off with this thing, and that's all working. That click you hear, that's the throttle, the fly-by-wire working. And the starter engages, works, I mean. So that's pretty cool. And I get power to the fuel pump wire. So that's ready to go when I get fuel in it. Get the tanks in there. So I'm going to get the ignition hooked up through the ISIS. And it looks like it's time to get the fuel tanks mounted in it. Put some fuel in it, some water in it. Get a clutch and a flywheel. And start this thing up. Make sure it's a go. And then start wiring up all the accessories and be done with it. Start putting it together.